summer, I was offered a summer internship at the Kumola Foundation, and it's a nonprofit organization that is committed to the preservation and revitalization of the Hawaiian culture through agriculture. So essentially it's a farm, and my job, in addition to that, their mission is to become more sustainable. So currently they're using gas generators to create electricity for themselves, but what they wanted was to use a more renewable energy source in this movement toward becoming sustainable. So after sitting down with them, we kind of had some discussions about what type of renewable energy would be best for them, and we decided that hydropower, like a water turbine, would be best. But in terms of why they would want it, let's zoom out a bit and think why hydropower in general. So first of all, it's renewable. Obviously, water is just an overflowing resource. And it also cuts down on the fossil fuel that we need to use. It's also cheap. So as you can see up there, we have 7 cents per kilowatt hour. That is about the price of electricity here in Oregon. So that is because 70% of our electricity here comes from Bonneville Dam, which is like a hydroelectric system at the border between Oregon and Washington. In comparison to that, where I'm from, in Hawaii, we pay about 21 cents per kilowatt hour, and that's because we use petroleum. So you can see the big difference when using renewable sources such as hydropower. It's also fairly efficient, more so than other renewable energy sources. Large-scale hydropower systems like Bonneville have approximately a 90% efficiency, while photovoltaic solar power has approximately 15%, and wind power has 35%. So there's a big difference between hydropower and the other ones. So there's also a big difference between hydropower and micro-hydropower. So hydropower is Bonneville, so it's those large-scale dams that are sent out to large groups of consumers. Whereas this little bucket here is a micro-hydropower system. That's a 5-gallon bucket, so if you think in your head dam versus the bucket, big difference. So another thing that's different between them is the efficiency. So large-scale systems like Bonneville have engineers and big groups of big corporations that are helping them. So they obviously are working really hard to make sure that they get the most out of it as possible. Mainly also because they're investing in it, they want as much of an output as possible. Whereas these ones are usually owned by consumers themselves. They usually make it themselves. And so, they don't have that extra set of eyes or that extra, the best equipment or things like that. So while the large scales are 90%, these smaller ones are approximately 50 to 70%. I mean, still very good compared to other renewable energy sources, but definitely not as good as the large scales. The biggest difference, though, is the power output. The large scales usually, so Bonneville specifically can output about 1,200 megawatts, whereas small little ones like this bucket here can only, at maximum, produce 100 kilowatts. So that's large magnitudes of difference. So that's something to know. So this is my baby. This is my water turbine I created this summer. As you can see, it's a bucket, so it's like that micro-hydropower system that we're looking at. And it's because the farm itself is only a few acres. So it's not like it needs lots of lights and things that needs to be used. So we decided that we would use this space because if you see that little thing there, it's kind of hard to see, but it's an irrigation system. So that pipe leads to that irrigation system, which leads to the carrow patches. So we thought that this spot would be the best for our water turbine because it was convenient for the farm because it was already something that they were using, and also because that what's that thing called? Sorry, I just had a fat brain for it. But that output can also lead, the output from the bucket can also lead through the system as well. But anyway, when I came back to Pacific, I had a hard time deciding what project I wanted to do. You come back senior year, what am I going to do? But after talking to Dr. Hall, we were like, oh, it's good to see what went behind it, because I had originally watched a YouTube video when I made this turbine, so I didn't really know what went behind it. So for my capstone project, I wanted to answer a couple of questions. They are, what are the physics principles behind hydropower, and how does hydropower vary with different conditions? So the first question, what are the physics principles behind hydropower? So let's think that this thing right here is a river or a stream with a specific cross-sectional area. With that cross-section area has water with a specific velocity. velocity flowing through that. With that area of velocity, we can find that there is a volumetric flow rate. When the water is diverted from that stream or river into a dam, we can see that if we were to look at a specific parcel of water, at the top it's going to have a specific potential energy per volume, because of the density, of rho GH, and what we see is this arrow, and as it goes through the dam, it's going to convert this potential energy to kinetic energy, as we all know, through the conservation of energy. Okay, so that diagram has a purpose, and that is to find this general power equation. So the P here is what we're looking for. We're looking for that power output of the system, how much we can get out of it. But it's dependent on the head, which I described as this potential energy term per volume, potential energy per volume. And it's dependent on the height, because that height is what makes the value bigger or smaller. We also have the volumetric flow rate, which is this from the source where the water is coming from. So that's also very important. And epsilon, the efficiency of the system. As much as we would like it to, we know that things never work 100% the way we want them to. So that's why this efficiency term is always important to keep in mind. So how does hydropower vary with different conditions? So all types refer to that general equation that we talked about. So this one right here is very dependent on that head. So that height difference, so whether if it's a high head or low head, that's going to result in different types of turbines being used. And all types of water turbines involve Bernoulli's equation, which is this equation right here. Basically, all this is telling us is that the energy in the water is conserved throughout the entire system. That's the main takeaway from that. And for my project, I analyzed two types of main water turbines, and that was Pelton and Kaplan. The Pelton is a high head, low flow system, so a high H and a low Q, and the Kaplan is a low head, high volumetric flow rate, so a low H, high Q. The Pelton turbine, so we're going to analyze that one first. So you can see that this dam is basically what we were discussing earlier. So this dam, while we have this potential energy, right, which is going to involve that H naught term, which is the height that we had discussed initially, we can see that the water is also going to travel down this height as it goes down this pipe. So we have to remember that as it travels down that height, that also needs to be included in our potential energy per volume equation. So, so that's just the main thing, and to remember that this height is the main thing that drives this Pelton turbine. So what do we do with the energy? So once that potential energy per volume is converted to kinetic energy per volume, we can see that we want all our energy to transfer from the water to the blade. As that water is transferred, we know that it's converted from potential energy per volume to kinetic energy per volume, so we can see that it's going to depend on that velocity. And that's what impulse means. For those of you in introductory physics and workshop physics, you know that impulse has to do with the change in momentum, so that's what we'll be looking at for this system. So everyone loves vectors, right? So we're going to play with some vectors here. So we have a blade, and it's stationary, and we have water with a specific velocity coming in, and since we want all the energy to go to zero in the water, we'll have our final velocity of our water be zero. But usually in a turbine, our blades are moving, so it's important to also remember that while there's a velocity of the water, it also has a velocity due to the blade. So we're going to have to zoom out and think of how these velocities are relative to each other. So for the water, we have this, the initial velocity minus the speed of the blade, and then we added that velocity of the blade to the final velocity of the water. And from that, we can find our change in momentum. That change in momentum, we can assume that we want our maximum change momentum to be that value right there, twice the initial momentum. And that's because if we think back to, again, introductory workshop physics, most of you did that, well, the door close one with the clay ball and the super ball. So the clay ball, right, you had it coming in with a specific velocity, and then it stopped at the wooden block, it didn't tip over. So you wouldn't have closed the door, because it would have stayed. However, the one with the super ball, when it came in, it bounced right back off. And when it did that, the block / door fell over. And so we can see from that that you will get the most change in momentum, and it will give you the most force if you maximize that by having it bounce off completely. So So by doing that, we can plug this value into this equation and find that the u, or the speed of the blade, will be negative twice the initial velocity of the water. But for our turbine, we want it to be due to the blade because that mechanical energy is what will be converted to the electrical energy. So we just flip the sign and we can see that for the maximum power, we want the speed of our blade to be half the initial velocity of the water. Moving on to the Kaplan turbine. This is my attempt at trying to make an original diagram of how the Kaplan turbine works. So from here we have water flowing in at a specific volumetric flow rate Q, and it's going to come through the dam, and then we're going to have it go through the turbine before it leaves the dam. So if we're looking at this, we're going to see that the actual turbine is in the middle of the system. Whereas in the Pelton, we saw that it was at the end after all the energy had been converted to kinetic. At this time, it's going to be in the middle of the system, so all the potential has not been converted to kinetic yet, so that's something to keep in mind. It combines the height difference, flow rate, and the pressure difference. So if we think back to Bernoulli's equation, right, you know how we had those three terms? In this turbine, all three of those kind of still play a part. But for the sake of simplicity and argument, we're going to say that the pressure difference, because it's the largest component, so we're just going to take a look at that. So I have this animation, but it doesn't like me sometimes, so we're just going to take a look right here. So if we take a look at this right here, so we're going to have our water coming in with a specific potential energy per volume, and at here it's going to be coming close. So when that happens, the pressure is going to increase. So when the pressure increases here, it's going to have to travel through here, and then as it moves, its pressure will kind of change because it's being sucked out here by this, and then out here it's back to atmospheric pressure. So what happens is this, so basically to recap, this is high pressure and this is low pressure. And what's going to happen is this low pressure is going to suck the water through the turbine system. And when the water is sucked through this turbine system, you can think of it as, so when it hits this part right here, there's still going to be a pressure difference acting on the water. And that pressure difference is what's going to be doing work on the blade, and that's what's going to cause the blade to move. So a good way to think about it is, usually, like if we think back to the Pelton, it's like blowing on a pinwheel. So like if you were to blow on the pinwheel, it's going to make it spin. But like in this one, it's like we're putting that pinwheel in like a tube, and we're like sucking on the tube. And if you suck, it's still going to cause the pinwheel to turn. So even though it's sometimes hard to grasp it, that's kind of a good way to think about it, because even though it's not completely intuitive, it's kind of something that we also can use to think about. So, so to compare the two, we have the Pelton versus the Kaplan. And for the Pelton, we know that it's more dependent on the head, or that height difference, so the potential energy per volume. That is the big part that we want to take away from that. And it's an impulse turbine, which means that we depend on that momentum change from the water hitting the blade. That is the biggest difference. So the Kaplan here, we have a more dependent on the volumetric flow rate. So while the head is smaller, it's going to have a lot more water coming in. So because it has a lot more water coming in, we're going to depend on this pressure difference when it enters the tube. And that pressure difference is going to work on the blades, and that's what's going to cause the turbine to move in that case. So after all of that background research, I looked back at my turbine that I created over the summer and was wondering if the turbine I created was even the right turbine to create at that time. So when I looked back and looked at the actual numbers for stream flow and thought of the height difference, so for the stream flow, I looked it up on the internet, and they had for Manoa Stream, for those of you who have been to Manoa, this farm is located right off of that. And so we found the stream flow of the stream itself to be 0.14 meters cubed per second. You can think that for my turbine, it would probably be smaller because the water is diverged from it. So it's not all of that water is being converted to my turbine. The height difference here, it's kind of hard to measure vertical dip when you're walking up a slope on a mountain. So what we did was we kind of estimated it ourselves. So we walked up, one of my colleagues was like, oh, so we walked up about a quarter mile. We kind of estimated if that was the right distance. We kind of estimated the angle of which we walked up. And from there, we got this value right here, 140 meters. And from there, we thought about how these numbers would incorporate into the system. So this is a really small number, and to think that it's going to get even smaller would definitely have you believe that the height difference is going to take precedence over the stream flow rate. And when we think of that, and we thought of the two conditions that we did, we can think that the Pelton turbine would be the best turbine for this situation. I also have there that the irrigation system kind of played a factor because, as I said earlier, it's a nonprofit organization, so they don't have that much money to spend on these turbines. So it was the best idea to just keep in contact with like what they had already put in place. So diverting from the irrigation system but going back into it was probably the best alternative for the farm. So, yeah, the happy face makes me feel better. So I'm almost done. So what's left to do is I have to calculate the power output for the turbine I created. So, which is kind of those numbers that I was talking to you about. So we're kind of playing around with those numbers. I've got a few power outputs. Numbers not looking too hot, so we're trying to see what, maybe there's some conversion factors that I'm missing or things like that. That's also something to look at. Another thing is finding how efficiencies affect the power output. I haven't really talked in this presentation about that epsilon term, but it's definitely something to look into because the efficiencies come from all parts of the system. So it comes from, you have the losses from the pipes, you have you have water loss when you're hitting the turbine itself. Some of the water is not going to be converted. And even within the turbine itself, a lot of mechanical stuff, so friction, and then not all the electricity is going to come. And so it's just, we got to analyze things like that. And finally, in the big picture, is micro hydropower really worth it? I know we're trying to move to renewable energy sources, but in the end, it's kind of a cost-benefit analysis, and then using micro hydropower is the best alternative for people in general. So, acknowledgements. I'd like to thank the Kapili Waihanai internship program, and the Kumula Foundation. Without them, this project probably would not have come to life. Dr. Hall, the little shirt right there, Dr. Hall, for being patient with me. It's been a long process. The physics department, you guys are great. Thanks for everything. Family and friends, most of them are in this front row right here. And the physics majors, you know, we call ourselves Miami Heat. Shout out to them. And Blake, Anthony. And the class of 2013, thanks for all the feedback and support, I really appreciate it. And with that, I can answer any questions you guys have. See, that's the turbine itself. So because the irrigation system was already there, we didn't have to pay for piping, and we didn't have, and then they're farms, so they have a lot of buckets. So that was just basically, yeah. So you know, all the stuff that they get and need to use for their farm. So basically, the only cost that we needed to pay for was to get the water to the actual turbine, which is like not very many pipes, so that wasn't too much of a cost. And the generator. The generator was the big money taker, I guess, and it was about $2,000. So that was the biggest cost to them.
Do you know the power output of your generator?
Unfortunately, no. It was only like a 12-week program, and then by the time we had gotten to that point, we were trying to find a voltmeter, but by then the session had ended, and I came back here. And
did you use it to run this thing? Did you connect it up to anything?
No, we were at the time that I left, we were trying to find batteries, because what people usually do is they hook those up to batteries, and they're charging the batteries to use it. So that's where we were in that process. Jordan?
If you had to venture a guess, is it worth the $2,000?
For them personally, yes, because the type of generator that they got is the best on the market right now, and since it wasn't already anything else was a cost to them because it's already like their irrigation system, I would say it does help because of the amount of water that they get out. Because of that large height drop, they're going to get a large amount of kinetic energy coming out of it, which will result in a larger power output.
Theoretically.
Theoretically, Theoretically, yes, I would think that would tell us.
What do you think will happen in the hydropower industry from what you've learned in the next?
So the biggest thing, okay, so hydropower is actually very good, right, in terms of like efficiencies and how cheap it is, but it's actually kind of on the decline because people are more worried about the biological effects of it in terms of like, I haven't read too much into it, but it's more like about like the space that they take up, all the buildup that they create, like the problems with fish, blocking them from moving upstream, spawning and things like that. But from what I've read, it's kind of on the decline because of those biological issues.
So did you say that's the farm they're using the turbine now, or are they?
Yeah, so, they were, I tried to get into contact with them when I went home this summer. But when I left their...
For Christmas.
Yeah, I was there this summer. I'm back in the winter. Yes, that's it. So when I went back, I connected with them, but at the time that I left, they had already got some batteries and they were already planning to get that ball rolling.
So a simple question, do you know if when they start using this turbine, will it take them off grid?
So the thing is, they were never really on the grid because they were using the gas generators. It's just, for them, it was just more about moving toward a more sustainable alternative. However, usually when people do micro hydropower, they do it to go off grid.